When I think about the most influential New York sports commentators over the past generation, Frank Isola is high on my list. From the New York Post to the Daily News to, yes, ESPN and SiriusXM, Isola's gone from local to national, but always with a New York feel. That's why we want to have Frank Isola on as the main event to tell us about how you become Frank Isola.
Andrew, that's some introduction. That only tells me that Al Michaels not available, Joe Buck not available, Ian Eagle, Jim Nance not available, so you got to me on that list. I'm finally in the same category as those guys.
There you go. Well, I don't know. I first met you, I was about 23 years old, agate clerk at the New York Post. That's an entry-level position, so mostly you're doing the statistics pages, but then you got to write every once in a while.
Yep.
And I was covering a Knick game. You're the beat guy for the Daily News. Mike Wise, the basketball columnist at the time for the New York Times, you guys came up to me and you complimented some of the stories I'd written, which meant a lot to me. But then the next night, I go in for my shift as an agate clerk, and Hondo, Pat Hannigan, legendary nighttime sports editor at the Post, says to me just out of the blue, says, "You're talking to the enemy? What are you doing?" And I'm like 23, and I didn't know what I do. I didn't know what I did wrong. I didn't know how to react, but that's how I first met you a long time ago.
Well, thank God. Thank God I was nice to you, because now it could work in my favor. You mentioned the name Pat Hannigan. He was the slot guy, the nighttime slot guy when I worked there. I started out as an agate clerk as well, got all the abuse from everybody on the desk and all the young writers. It's kind of the learning process. Back then, you never went to HR. You just kind of took the abuse from everybody. Yes. I thought like you were supposed to get yelled at all the time. All I did was get yelled at. And when I was an agate clerk, Michael Kay was trying to start to be a writer. So by me doing all the remedial work for him, Mike was actually able to write more. So I always tell him that really the guy that launched your career was me. If you ask him, he'll tell you the same thing.
Kay owes you. I used to work 80 hours a week, and then Greg Gallo, the sports editor, would say something. Yeah, you could put in for an extra. You're on a timesheet. You can put in for an extra 4 hours. I mean, I didn't expect maybe 40 extra, but and they weren't paying me a lot. So, but I would take that extra 4 hours. But it was a different time. They're definitely, when I think back to some of the things, it probably doesn't pass the mustard. I am interested, before I get to my read, how did you break in? What did you I know you're a tremendous soccer player, played soccer at Maryland. That true?
You might want to redo that one over. I walked on one year. They were nice enough to put me on the team. Tremendous as they were. I think at some point this season, they were ranked number one in the country. We weren't ranked number one in the country when I was there, but they gave me a nice pair of cleats. They actually threw me in to a couple of games, but tremendous. The first time I saw Taylor Twellman, I said, I go, "You broke all my records at Maryland." He goes, "Really? How many goals you scored?" I said, "None." So when you scored your first goal,
there you go.
You broke my record.
Yeah, Taylor Twellman, the excellent analyst for Apple, formerly ESPN, who was Maryland and an MLS a standout, played national team. You all know him. So you're at Maryland, and then you come out. Like, what is Frank Isola? How do you get into the business?
I learned I realized at an early age I wanted to do something with sports. And I was smart enough to realize I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. And, you grew up reading the newspapers, especially in New York, with the Daily News, the Post. Growing up on Long Island, you read Newsday, the New York Times. So I was infatuated with that kind of lifestyle, that kind of career. So even when I was at Maryland, I worked for the student newspaper. And back then, they used to give you $10 a story. We came out 5 days a week, the Diamondbacks. So if you got 2 stories in a week, that was $20. That kind of carried you a long way. So I was lucky enough to get in at the New York Post. I got in there for like 2 weeks one summer, the next summer maybe for a month, the next summer for maybe like another month. And by the time I graduated, they had a position. It was, you mentioned it, entry level. It was a bottom position. And back then you tried to write when you could. And just, all you always tell young people, just get clips. You just wanted your name in the paper with your byline on it. And that eventually led to a writing job. I loved working for a newspaper. I still miss it today. I kind of even miss reading the newspapers. I know I can go to the store and get them, but there was something to be said about waking up. And this when you were writing for a newspaper as well. You'd go to the store, you'd buy all the newspapers. And even before the internet, was there a worse feeling than going to the store to buy the paper and the beat that you were covering? One of the competitors had something in the paper that you didn't have, that you would have a sick feeling for 24 hours because you couldn't make up getting beat on a story right away like you can today. You could do it within a minute.
Yep,
Back when it was just newspapers, no internet, That was a long 24 hours.
It's a definite ethos. I definitely had that when I hit a double for the Post, then TJ Quinn would have a home run, and you look at the paper, you're like, I thought I had a good double there. All right, we're presented by WSC Sports. If you're a league, your team, your network, you got to use WSC Sports Digital Asset Management. You got to highlight Frank Isola goal from a couple weeks ago. You want to bring that back. You need it in seconds. They use AI. Seconds, you can see that Isola, a goal that he scored for Maryland. Digital Asset Management. Go to WSC-sports.com. Twice a week podcast, AndrewMarchand.com to subscribe. Let's talk about that, because I do think, now I don't want us to sound old here, but there is something to be said. When I started, the internet was just there. It wasn't, stories were on the internet, but it wasn't your focus. They didn't put the stories up till the next day. It wasn't right away. So there was that competitive feeling that you had, because especially post Daily News at that time. And so just give us a little taste. And I've had Joel Sherman on, I had Kay on, I've had John Schefter, Peter King. So we've talked about some of these things. For you, especially you covered baseball, but you also really covered the Knicks. Give me your best story about, you go to the newsstand and either you got a win, you got an L, like what, give me that taste of and where you were and what that was like.
I always say the feeling that you get from having a story, it feels good, but it's nothing compared to getting beat on a story. You feel sick, like you feel like you failed. And I always used to say too, especially with the NBA, I always felt like the year starts September 1st. Like, it's not January 1st, it's September 1st, because then you start getting anxiety because, training camp's right around the corner. And I always felt like if you felt, and you knew this from covering the Yankees, and it's the Knicks, same high profile beat. Even if you had a good year, you always felt like at the start of training camp, you were starting over from scratch again. So anything that you did the year before really didn't matter. It kind of motivated you on some level. But there were times like when you had a story, but there was a part of you that felt bad because you're traveling with the other writers. Not all of them you're getting along with. They're not all best friends, but everyone is trying to do a good job. When you had a story that you knew only you had and they're playing catch up the next day, there was a part like you're not taunting people. You didn't, point at them and tell them, you got beat on the story, you're going to have a miserable day. I never felt like that. There was one that stands out, though, was when Stephon Marbury and Isaiah Thomas had a thing on a plane, and I found out that they got into a screaming match on the plane. And I wrote that story. Nobody else had it. And by the time the morning rolled around, now this is the internet age, and by the time the morning rolled around, I heard that they'd already sent him back. So while everyone else was trying to find out whether or not whether this story really happened, because everyone is hoping that someone will come out and say, that never happened. That's nonsense. So everyone was working on that story. I already had the story that they had sent him back home. So not only was I ahead of the story on that, while everyone was trying to recover, I was, I had already written that story. So, you know how it is. You give sources, you have people that tell you stuff. You make a lot of phone calls. There's a lot of work that you have to put in. But I always felt like with, me and Stephon Marbury, our like careers in a weird way started out the same, because my first job at the New York Post, writing job, was covering high school basketball. When I covered high school basketball, he was a young kid and his brother was playing, his brother Norman. So I'd see Steph at all the games. And it was funny because back then everyone would say, you see that kid right there? That kid's going to be a great player. But when you're going to high school games in Brooklyn, Manhattan, the Bronx, they tell you that everyone's going to be a good player. But there was something about him. He was very charismatic, even as a young kid. So he knew people that I knew. He would call me up at my house. He would, he was like maybe in 7th grade, and he would call me up at my house to talk basketball. And there was one night I got asked to help out at a Bulls-Knicks game at Madison Square Garden. It was Valentine's Day. I'm going to forget the year. I showed up like the Post back then at big events. You know this, Andrew. You'd send like 4 or 5 people. So I go to the game. I'm covering high school at the time. I go to the game, and who do I see in the locker room? I see Stephon Marbury. And again, he's either in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, right in that range. And I remember saying, what are you doing here? He said, I know somebody who works here. So I got in. So, I'm talking with him, throughout, like when the media availability in the locker room. And then after the game, he's in the press room with a guy named Rob Johnson, who was like a noted kind of like, New York basketball guy that had connections to coaches and to players. And we're sitting in the press room. And I said, how are you going to get home? And he said, I thought you would drive me. And I said, I can't drive you home. He's living in Coney Island. I had to go up to Connecticut at the time. That's where my wife was living. We were dating at the time. So I said, I'm going to Connecticut. So he follows me to my car. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll drive you to the base of the Brooklyn Bridge. Like, this is how dumb I am. I'm thinking he must live on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge. I said, we'll get there and I'll call you a cab. He starts getting like a little upset in the car. I could tell he was scared. I said, all right, I'll drive you home. And then he was happy. I get to his house and, it's late. I mean, it's probably 12:30 in the morning. So I stop the car. He gets out and I'm waiting for him to go in his house. And he's looking back at me. He runs back and he says, why are you still waiting? I said, I'm waiting for you to get in. He goes, all right. He goes, Frank, when you leave, do not stop at any lights. And I think he meant it kind of as a joke.
Yeah.
He got me pretty good. And years later, when he got traded to the Knicks, this is a true story. His first game with the Knicks was going to be in Cleveland, and that's where they held the press conference. And Mike Vaccaro, your former colleague at the New York Post, asked Stephon Marbury, what's your first memory of Madison Square Garden? And he said, go ask Frank Isola, he'll tell you.
That's a great story.
It was all related to that story. The three big names in basketball were in the Garden that night, Andrew. Me, Stephon Marbury, and Michael Jordan. The three of us. That's when we all met.
In that order. You want to listen to the rest of the podcast? AndrewMarchand.com, AndrewMarchand.com. I want to get into the Knick coverage. But first you covered baseball. Right?
Yeah.
You did that for a year. Now I covered baseball for a long time. I think you probably couldn't cut it. Was that the issue?
That's a real job.